Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Purpose Driven Investor Podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurs, investors, and business leaders who are building wealth while making an impact. Today, I'm joined by Chris Arnold. He's the founder of Cornerstone Upstate, a real estate investment company focused on residential properties throughout the upstate of South Carolina. Chris has built a business with multiple divisions, including rental leasing, fix and flip projects, property management, and landscaping services. On top of that, he also works in AI and technology as a CX advisor, helping enterprise companies improve efficiency and customer experience through AI deployment. So today we're going to talk about building business, scaling real estate, leveraging technology, and how Chris approaches entrepreneurship across multiple industries. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, cool. Well, I'm so happy to have you today. And I think it's going to be a real interesting conversation. So let's first start with your entrepreneurial backstory. Tell us about your background and how did your entrepreneurial journey begin?
Yeah, that's it could be a really lengthy story, so I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version.
All right.
Because it's a very, I'll say, non-traditional path to entrepreneurship. I'll say I've worked a W-2 job up until last August. And so I was just your standard W-2 employee, worked for a large corporation, Verizon, for most of that time. Actually started out in college as a call center agent, where they had a tuition assistance program, helped me finish my last 2 years at Clemson. And when I got out of Clemson, they offered me a leadership job. And so then I was sort of off to the races in the telecommunications industry. Never really thought about real estate, certainly didn't think about owning my own business and sort of heading down the what I would have considered the very risky path of entrepreneurship. And so in 2002, when I graduated Clemson, I immediately bought the house, immediately sort of got engaged to the girl, and I sort of started checking all of the adult boxes all of a sudden. And I would say when I look back on it, my entry into real estate really started in 2002 with the purchase of that first home. It had an unfinished basement, so I started down the road of learning all of the contractor skills. I finished out the entire basement myself. I learned electrical, plumbing, so much so that I went and got my GC license. And so this was probably 2003, maybe early 2004 at this point. As soon as I finished that, the company I was working for asked me to move to Little Rock, Arkansas. And so couldn't say no. It was a great opportunity career-wise. And here I am, I'm engaged. I'm getting married in July of 2004. In February of 2004, I left Greenville for the first time, born and raised here, loved the community, went to Malden High School, and left to move to Little Rock, Arkansas, of all places. And so we ended up getting married in July. She moved out after we got married, and we started having children. And sort of you fast forward from 2004, after having moved, I think we did 8 corporate relocations, and you're buying and selling houses, you're moving into not only new communities, but we're moving into different states. And so that has sort of a set of lessons of its own hardships. And she also grew up here and was the first person in her family to ever leave the state. So here we go, we're leaving, we're 12 hours away, we're starting to have a family. And then the company starts moving us around. In 2008, we sort of took advantage of the financial crisis when everything was melting down. I found a foreclosure in Little Rock. And so we bought it. In the midst of that, Verizon came in and bought the company I was working for, Altel. And so it was just very tumultuous times. But I took advantage of the opportunity with this foreclosure, put some lipstick on it. We did a lot of cosmetic work to it while we were there. We were only there for about a year before yet again the company moved us to Charlotte, North Carolina. And so the moves continued over the years. And then in 2018, we came full circle. The company moved us back to Greenville. And so I had an office in Malden where I grew up. And so you talk about full circle.
Yeah, that is full circle.
And when I look back on it, I'm a man of faith. And I see God's hand through all of this. Hindsight's 2020. And so there's no way I would have been able to ordain all of this. 2018, we're back in Greenville, back close to family. We now have 3 kids, none of which were born in South Carolina. And now we're literally 5 minutes from the grandparents. And then in December of 2019, so we'd been back here a little over a year, my wife, 43 years old, suddenly passed away. And so December of 19, I find myself instantly a single dad, a widower, trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing? Because at the same time, I had decided that I was going to leave this nearly 20-year career at Verizon. And along the way, we had picked up a lake lot at Kiowee. I'd always had this dream of us sort of retiring on Kiowee. I was getting my master's. I was 2 classes away from finishing my master's. She passes away. We're already grading this lot, getting ready to pour concrete. And so when she passed away, I had to pause all of that. So for the previous 5 years, we had owned this lot and we had planned to retire there, and I was going to become an adjunct professor at Clemson. It was always my dream to be back in the classroom and teaching the next generation. Overnight, that dream completely changed. And so I had about a month to sort things out. I had to get my family right. I've got 3 kids at home. My 2 youngest were in elementary school. My oldest at the time was in 8th grade. So you can imagine how challenging that was.
Yes.
Here I am trying to figure out, I'm exiting a nearly 20-year telecommunications career. I am now the sole provider, and trying to figure out how am I going to do all of this. So with God's help, I did find another fantastic job, which is the AI company that you mentioned earlier. Started that job in March, so less than 4 months after her passing. And then 1 week after I start, COVID melts the world down. And so everything is, in the sense of the world, everything's coming unraveled. And so I have to decide, what am I going to do with this lake property? I decided, because it was our dream, to continue. And so we finished construction. It took us about 18 months on this lake property to wrap that up, and we started using it. And, I made every single decision that went into that house, and every step of the way, I tried my best to honor what she would have wanted.
That's awesome.
And it turned out incredible. But for about a year, maybe a year and a half, we used it. And as you already know, kids at these ages, they're super busy. Life just sort of got in the way. And there was no more retiring to the lake dream. There was no more adjunct professor dream. All of that changed on December 19th of 2019. And so I had to decide, what am I going to do with this big, beautiful lake house? It's a prime piece of property in Seneca. And I had to make the hard decision to sell it. And so in 22, I made the decision to sell it. I won't give you all the details about how we ended up finding the buyers, but we found some fantastic buyers. I made a great premium on it. And that is really the catalyst for what got me into real estate as an investor. That home we attempted for that to be a short-term rental when we built it, because I knew we weren't going to be able to use it as much as,
right,
what we were going to do, which was live in it. And so 1 month after I got the certificate of occupancy on the house, Seneca added an ordinance that prohibited short-term rentals in the city. I happened to be in the city. And then my HOA came behind that and doubled down on it. So there was 1 week where I had an opportunity to use it as a short-term rental. After that, prohibited. And so at this point, it's going to sit empty 85% of the time. Too beautiful a house to let that happen, so I had to let it go. And out of that, I was trying to figure out, how do I make the most of this? And it came by way of a 1031 exchange. And so as I learned more and more about the tax benefits of real estate, the power of a 1031 exchange, I took that one lake house and I turned it into 7 properties in Greenville.
That's incredible.
Greenville County is where all of my properties were at the time. And so that's sort of how Cornerstone Upstate came to be. And the name itself, Cornerstone, my faith guides every decision that we make as a company. Everything aligns back to that core purpose, which is honoring God and sort of having a God-driven purpose. And Upstate is where we've decided to focus. So as we get into the conversation, you'll see I'm very, very focused on making as deep an impact as I can here, rather than, spreading myself a mile wide and an inch deep, trying to do a lot of, sort of remote investment. But that's how I got here.
Love that. Yeah, that's quite the journey. Yeah, and sounds, like you've really got a purpose. Really got a purpose in what drives you every single day now.
Sure.
So let's talk about Cornerstone, and you talked a little bit about, hey, I sold the lake house, and then this gave me an opportunity to buy additional properties. But what do you think drove you to settle on real estate in terms of utilizing those funds for the next thing?
Yeah, I've when I look back across really my whole life, I've always been a builder. It's sort of the same story I mentioned to you when I bought the first house. I just was compelled to finish that basement. And I've always been the builder. I was the kid, in the neighborhood, out in the woods, building tree houses, forts. And when I look back, the common thread is that I've always wanted to build something of my own. And so it just became super apparent that when I built this lake house, and that was not going to be the optimal, use of that over a long period of time because of the unforeseen death of my wife, then it became obvious to me that I could make an impact here in Greenville County, which is sort of beyond my kids. Greenville County is my next love. I have such a deep appreciation for this community, as does apparently the rest of the world, because they're all moving here. And so, there's a lot of, I'll say, tailwinds for us as real estate investors in Greenville. You got to play your cards right, because obviously prices are difficult. Demand is super high, which puts pressure on supply, and then obviously price. But it was so important for me to try to be as efficient with the sale of that lake property as I could. And there's nothing more efficient, than many times keeping dollars out of Uncle Sam's pocket, which was the 1031 exchange. And it became obvious that now this can become a legacy for me, because I've thought a lot about having 4 kids now. What am I leaving behind? Right. And it's such a beautiful legacy to think about what all of these, the real estate properties themselves can do for my children. It gives them so many options that I didn't have growing up. And so once I really wrapped my mind around all of the benefits of real estate, it was a no-brainer for me to head down this path.
Love that. And I think especially it's timely today. We're talking on April 16th. Tax day was yesterday, right? And so, talking about the tax benefits of real estate is important, right? I know even though I'm in real estate, I did as much as I could to address my tax bill in 2025, but I still had a tax bill, right? Yeah. I'm hoping 2026 will be different, but that's important, and sounds like it's been extremely beneficial to you.
Yeah.
So talk about Cornerstone and your multiple divisions. So how'd you evolve into multiple divisions across Cornerstone?
I guess the way that I would first answer that is sort of with a life lesson that I've learned, sometimes learned the hard way, and it's to hold things loosely. It's like, as hard as it was selling that lake house, I had to hold it loosely, because if I held on super tight to it, you fast forward enough years and it's just going to end up getting run down. It sits empty. It ultimately will not live up to its potential, and it certainly never would live up to the dream that my wife and I had for it. And so I had to hold that lake house loosely, and I was super discerning when it came to who I was willing to sell it to and under what conditions I was willing to sell it, because I didn't have to. Right. So I was in a position where I had the ability, sort of the leverage, to set some of those conditions. And so I've just learned over time, instead of having this sort of, a lot of us walk around with this it's not an abundance mindset. We have this sort of scarcity mindset, and we cling to things super tightly, and we end up missing the real blessing. We really end up missing the greater thing that we could have. And so I've just learned with an abundance mindset, I can hold things loosely. And when I do that, new doors open. And so I take these small steps. The 1031 exchange took one lake house, turned it into 7 sort of buy and hold properties, because that's what I wanted to do. And the bigger purpose behind that was I wanted to be a landlord that you never heard about. I wanted to be the landlord that managed my own properties, that really created a great experience for either my guests or my tenants. We haven't gotten into this, but I really use all 3 formats. I do a little short-term rental, I do a lot of mid-term rental, and now I'm doing some long-term rental. So I've kind of hit all 3 bases in that word. And so I always wanted to really sort of be that host or that landlord that you never hear about, which is the ones that create a great experience by taking great care of the property. And so I think that's part of my way of giving back to Greenville County, is to create these great experiences for renters. It's really tough out there. And now that, we've been very successful with the buy and hold, I've reached a point where I don't need any more. And you hear about all these real estate guys that are sort of using the number of doors, number of properties as bragging rights. Right. That's not me. How much is enough? I don't need more doors. I need enough just to take care of my family, to sustain my legacy. Right now that's 13 doors. I'm happy with that. And so out of that was born, the deals keep coming. I don't really want to buy and hold anymore. I'm managing these myself. The cash flow is great. It's, enough to keep me super busy. Maybe I need to start going down this fix and flip path, and in terms of beautifying the community, this is an opportunity for me to find these, problems to solve, you might say. And that's sort of the core tenet of everything I do, is find a problem to solve. And what I tell my kids is, the bigger the problem, the bigger the profit.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I hear that all the time, right?
Yeah. And so out of that sort of holding things loosely and really being committed to improving the community in whatever format you can, it has created these divisions.
Great. And so when you look at the divisions, are those all internal divisions for Cornerstone, or are you working with outside and like a third, like me as an investor, you come and landscape my property as an example?
It's all sort of vertically driven inside a Cornerstone. It's all been 100% organic, based on the relationships that I've built over time. Sort of the fix and flip business, we're shooting for 5 or 6 properties a year right now. Again,
that's great.
Not shooting for the moon, but that's plenty.
It is.
Oh, and I've got an incredible GC. We've got a great partnership, and anybody who does this understands the importance of having great contractors.
100%.
And he's a guy that I don't have to watch over him. We meet once a week. We walk the project. We design. We partner on every detail. Every floor plan decision. I manage sort of the business side of it on the front end, the acquisition side. I deal with all the attorneys, all the banks. I deal with all the agents on the back end when it's time to sell. He focuses purely on construction. And so I think of it as almost like 2 Venn diagrams, where I do what I do, he does what he does, and where that overlaps, there's just magic that can happen. And it really comes down to doing what you say you're going to do, doing it with a high degree of integrity, do it the right way, even when it hurts. And sometimes it does hurt, and you have to eat that, and that's the cost of tuition, and we all have to, if we do it right, we have to be willing to pay the cost of tuition. Otherwise, we're not working with integrity. And again, that comes back to the core tenet of Cornerstone. And so out of that comes all of this organic growth that's really rooted in relationships, and like the landscaping piece of it. When you're a buy and hold, you can spend a whole lot of money on landscaping and maintenance. Well, guess what? I got a son that's got 2 able hands, and he is my heir apparent. again, going back to legacy. So I've got him starting his own landscaping business.
That's awesome.
He started pushing a mower, and I said, son, how long do you want to push a mower? You need to start talking to people, learning how to not only attain more business, I want you to go out and get corporate contracts. I don't want you just mowing lawns to mow lawns. You need to talk to people who can come work for you and they can push the mower. And so he's only in 10th grade, so we're starting to teach him some of those lessons. Again, that goes back to legacy. And all of that's organic, and that's Cornerstone Upstate today.
That's great. You're teaching them a lot of valuable lessons, right? And the ones that'll last, talk about legacy, those will be with him forever, which is great. All right, cool. So market obviously has changed quite a bit since you got started. What have you seen shift in the upstate of South Carolina over the last several years?
I'd say the biggest shift since I started were interest rates. I haven't seen a tremendous amount of change in terms of sort of what I would consider the supply and demand. Demand was already super high in 22. It went up in 23, and I'm seeing more and more what I would consider institutional competition in my space, where I focus very much on single family homes, residential. I ventured into a little bit of the small multifamily. I picked up some duplexes, but it's really, really tough on the sort of the money side of things. Everything's so much more expensive. If in a word, it would just be prices of everything have gone up, and it puts incredible pressure on, real estate investors who are paying higher taxes, higher insurance, higher interest rates. Money is expensive right now. And that is in contrast to where we were in, like 2018, 2019, 2020, money was cheaper. And so you have to really double down on your ability to manage the expense side of the equation. Rents have not kept up with the price of everything else. And I think this is where sometimes landlords get a bad name, where tenants, people out there shopping for rentals consider us to be greedy, when I don't think most of us are greedy. I think everything is super expensive, and rents at 2,000 are breaking even all of a sudden, and that's a challenge. But I like the fact that we have so much of a tailwind when it comes to demand for our product. So it just incents me to create an even better product than everybody else that's in the space, sort of competing for those renters. And so I try to create a very high quality product at the lowest expense. And so far that has been sort of a recipe for success.
That's great. Love that. And that leads me to the next question in terms of, obviously costs are increasing. It makes deals harder to find, I imagine. So when you look at a deal now in today's market, what makes it attractive for you? What do you, when you see a deal, you say, hey, that's an attractive deal. I want to go for that one.
Yeah, for sure. And it reminds me of when I did the 1031 exchange, sold the lake house. That in and of itself, taking that, because the time constraints of a 1031, I had 6 months to turn this one property into 7. And so
that's a lot.
It took a lot. It took systems for me to be able to execute that, and it took great relationships. And sometimes when you're under a time constraint like that, you can sometimes let the tax tail wag the dog, and then maybe you buy a property that you wouldn't have otherwise bought.
Right.
It might have been a little bit of that, where I paid a premium because I was buying retail. I was buying off the MLS. Because that clock's ticking. What's different now, and it has really nothing to do with the market. When I'm no longer under that time constraint of the 1031, I take my time. The deals are there, and you have to have, by way of these relationships, I'm finding off-market deals left and right. So much so that I can't even take advantage of them. So in a sort of a surgical way, I am giving deals to, people I have relationships with. I have other landlords that I'm taking tenants that I have no space for, and I'm helping them drive down their vacancies. And so it's this ecosystem of relationship. And what's different is that I no longer feel like I have to pay a premium. There are so many off-market, I'll say, problems again. You know, the bigger problem you can solve, the bigger the opportunity, you know, the upside on the back end. And so I've got real estate agents that are aware of what we do, how well we do it. You know, we have high integrity, we have high quality. So they bring me deals. You know, I do a little bit of driving for dollars on Fridays. I go to the best neighborhoods and I look for the worst house in those neighborhoods. And I've got a flyer I'll drop in mailboxes. You know, that has changed a lot too. Over the last 3 years, I would say there's so much more of that. People buying old, ugly houses. And so there's a ton of competition, but there are still plenty of off-market deals. And that's where I really focus my attention, because those are opportunities for me to come, you know, and help a seller solve a problem that they otherwise can't sell. They can't go to a bank. They can't sell the property because they don't have the funds to fix it up, you know, and here I am, I can come in and I can help relieve that problem for them.
Love that. That's a great way to look at it. You know, a lot of people look at real estate investors, and I think you mentioned earlier, or landlords, and say, oh, you're greedy, right? You're trying to make money off. But really, at the end of the day, you're just trying to solve a problem, right? And if you can solve that problem, there's an opportunity for you.
100% right.
Let's talk a little bit about AI. I think you know, you've got some experience in that. That's a very hot topic today, right? And I think we can focus it a bit. First, tell us a bit what you do in the AI space, and then I'd love to hear from you also is, how do you think AI is going to impact the real estate investing space in the next few years?
Yeah, AI is where I spend the vast majority of my time. So I'm an advisor for a company called ASAP, ASAP with 2 P's. We have been for the last 10 years, so we consider ourselves a startup. But that was a W-2 job that I had up until August of last year. And then I left and became an independent contractor. They asked me to stay on as an advisor. And so we work with really Fortune 500 companies who are trying to figure out how to install artificial intelligence into their very complicated technology stack, their convoluted processes. They have data all over the place. They've never really put all of that data to good use. And so data is sort of the fuel that makes the AI engine go. And the better the data, the better the output. So it's like garbage in, garbage out. So I spend a lot of time working with these large enterprises, looking at their current operations, saying, here's where we can add intelligence in a way that will actually change your business outcomes. It's not this feature that you bolt on and, you know, it helps us do more work faster. No, it actually changes your customer outcomes.
That's huge.
It's massive, you know, and it's also massively hard. But I would say history will show that the ones that took on the challenge, those will be the companies that go further fastest. And anybody that's still sitting on the sidelines, I would consider it an existential threat to their survival long term, because AI is going to, the way I think about it, in probably 5 years, maybe 7, AI will just become part of the environment. You know, it's not going to just be this chat GPT thing that I type in a question and it spits out, you know, this great answer. No, it's going to be in everything that we use. It'll be in the walls. It'll be in the coffee maker. It'll just become part of the environment, a little bit like the internet. You know, the internet's just ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't imagine meeting a person who says, you know what? No, I'm not going to use the internet. I'm playing wait and see. AI is going to be a lot like that. There is no playing wait and see. We all need to be using it. And I think from a real estate perspective, there are tremendous amounts of data that are out there that when all of this comes together, and it's already available today. So you think about the Zillows and, you know, the Redfins and all of the websites that exist today that you would have to go to these disparate sources to go find deals, to go find information, market trends. all of that will sort of fade into the background, and you will be able to go to, like a chat GPT in the short term, and you will be able to ask it anything that you want to ask it, and it will bring forward deals. It will bring forward problematic areas in whatever zip code, crime rates, all the things that you need to know to really identify location, because I am a firm believer for real estate investors, it all begins with location. That's a cliche for a reason. Location. And so I think AI's ability to bring all of these disparate sources of data together into a comprehensive answer is just more than the human mind can do. And it's more work than we're often able to do by going to all of these different sources. Mm-hmm. It will pull it together in a very effective way to help you identify where should I point the investment engine next.
That's huge. I love that. So let's say I'm individual real estate investor. I'm not a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company. I just want to get ahead of the curve. What's one thing that I should learn in AI today, or be focused on learning to get me ahead of the other guy that's behind, sitting on the sidelines?
I think in an answer, it's going to be get really comfortable speaking to whatever the AI is that you have access to. Today I use Claude and I use ChatGPT. I just need something to compare the answers to. And what's happening right now with a lot of the real estate specific entities, like I mentioned Zillow as an example, they are on the AI train. They're trying to use AI to make their website more useful, to do a lot of the things that I just mentioned. Unfortunately, I don't think that will be the long-term answer for them. I think a lot of these websites, like I said, will fade into the background, and we will be able to use whatever sort of LLM, large language model solution, whether it be Anthropic, it be OpenAI. There will be a host of others. Gemini at Google is a pretty good one. You will be able to go in and you will be able to type what it is that you are looking for. And I would say right now, the way to do this is to get really good at using these LLMs, pick a couple, do some A/B testing, see what outputs are most useful to you, because it's going out to the Zillows and the Redfins and all the other, Realtor.coms of the world, and it's already sort of scraping those websites for the information we need. But if I were you and, us as relatively new to the AI industry as real estate investors, get really good at those prompts. Asking better questions will give you better outputs. And I think that's a very iterative process. I have watched myself over the last year get better at asking the AI for certain information. As I ask better questions, I get better answers.
Yeah. I like that. I think I've seen it in my life too. It's like, I think there's two things. One, practice makes perfect, right? So continue to practice using it. But to your point, like, ask better questions, you're going to get better results.
That's right.
And I mean, that's in life, right? Whether AI or not. But if you do that with AI, your results are going to improve. I like that. Mm-hmm. All right, let's get into purpose. We've got a couple more segments here. We'll talk about purpose, and then we'll do a rapid fire close. Like I like to do at the end, but I think it from our discussion previously and at the beginning of this call, you talked a lot about purpose and kind of teased it a little bit. But talk about what drives you personally and what your purpose is day in, day out, beyond just making money.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I'm constantly reminded, with 4 kids, the importance of that legacy. And real estate just happens to be the vehicle in which, this legacy, which is, we all should want something that's going to outlive us, and I don't think you can, if your purpose ends with how much money can I make, how many doors, like if your purpose is a number, you're never going to reach it. Because I've had the good fortune to, by way of these W-2 jobs, climbing the corporate ladder, I've had the good fortune of making a lot of money. I remember when I was doing that call center job in 2000, I'm 2 years from graduating from Clemson. I remember the thought of thinking, if I could just get to $70,000 a year, that's all I need.
Right.
And I got there. And guess what? That didn't quite do it. And I've learned now that I'm old and wise, I've learned that as long as your purpose is a number, doesn't matter if it's dollars or doors, you're never going to get there. And so purpose has to be something bigger than ourselves. And for me, it's leaving something for my kids, and what they do with it will be totally up to them. I try to, again, hold things loosely. I don't try to become too prescriptive, but I do want to leave them in a better place than where I was left. Never received anything from my family. Everything at Cornerstone Upstate is 100% my blood, sweat, and tears. Started working a W-2 at 14 years old, pretty much never stopped. And then in August at 52 years old, I was able to walk away from the W-2. What a blessing, because it's not so much about financial freedom, it's about time freedom. And that's what real estate has provided for me, is time freedom. And that's what I think we should all be striving for, and so if it's a number, you'll never get there. Realize that early, and so my purpose is really making sure that I put my kids in a place where I don't have to worry about them after I'm gone, and that I do all of that in a way that's honoring God, and that clearly informs exactly how we show up at Cornerstone every day.
Talk about that a bit further. How does your faith drive how you show up every single day, even during the hard days?
Oh, it starts with reliability, and I mentioned integrity earlier. We do what we say. It hurts, and I always tell my crews, I'm like, we're not going to take shortcuts, and I'm looking for shortcuts. And if we take them, we're going to do it over. I had a flip, I guess it was earlier this year. It was probably a mistake of mine. I wasn't clear, but they put 3-tab shingles on this house, and I made them take 3-tab shingles off and replace it with 30-year architectural.
Really?
Take them off, and I ate that. But that's the cost of tuition. And so it's little things like that where if you're going to say you're going to be committed to making the Greenville community better and more beautiful, in spite of all the craziness that's happening, all the craziness that can happen can sometimes cause us to get distracted and lose heart. It sometimes feels like the world's rapidly running in the wrong direction, so all of what I'm doing doesn't really matter. I'm just working here with 13 doors, 4 or 5 flips a year. Does that really matter? Yes, it matters. It matters in how you show up every single day, and do you show up in a reliable way, high quality product, solving problems in a way that genuinely helps people get into their first home, helps your tenants really have a great experience. This is their home, and so that informs how I perform maintenance. Am I doing my quarterly maintenance inspections? Am I changing air filters? It's all those little nuances. Again, I don't outsource any of my property management. I'm about as hands-on as you can get. And it's because I'm completely married to sort of this God-centered expectation that I do everything with excellence. And it's all for the people that are sort of under my care, whether it be my tenants or it be the buyers of the homes that we're fixing and flipping.
I love that. And that could be huge impact. I know you mentioned like, oh, well, sitting here with 13 rentals, how much impact can you make? But it's like, think about the 13 families that are in that house, right? And then the amount of those people then that they can make an impact on just because they have a better living situation and they have a landlord that takes care of them, right? And then you think about your crews, right? And you just multiply it by all the people that you touch every single year. It's huge, right? And the people that they touch, because maybe they're in a better mood today because, hey, Chris was nice to me today, or Chris gave me an extra bonus, or Chris did the right thing, and so I'm going to do the right thing, right? I think that's huge.
And I think that's part of the abundance mindset, so my GC gets a bonus when he finishes ahead of schedule. Why not? We all win. There's plenty to go around. But so often we cling to this scarcity mindset, and it causes us to take shortcuts. And unfortunately, I have worked with some GCs before I formed this relationship with my current one. Too many shortcuts, and I took people too often for their word, and I paid the price, and that was my cost of tuition. And so I now have this trust but verify mindset. And so you have to be very judicious when it comes to these relationships, and you have to inspect what you expect. So it is work, but man, is it worth it if you do it right and you've got a purpose that's bigger than just yourself. Because I like to say a man who's caught up in himself makes for a very small package. And there's probably been times where I've been selfish, and I haven't always had this abundance mindset, and it's one where you have to take on the risk, and that's where my faith comes in. I know that he provides. There's too many times in my past where I didn't see a way out, and he led me there. He led me through the darkest days, and I want my kids to see that. Again, it goes back to legacy. They watch everything we do. And so I want them to see how I run Cornerstone. I bring them to every project. We go into these homes that we're fixing and flipping, and we write prayers inside the walls before we drywall it.
Love it.
And so there's so many ways that you can have a meaningful life that's guided by this purpose that's bigger than ourselves. Anybody who's, stopping at a number, eventually you'll realize that the number was never enough.
Yep. Love that. That's great advice. All right, let's conclude with some rapid fire questions here. I've got 5 questions for you, and would love to hear your answer. So first one is your favorite business book.
Ooh, that's a tough one. My favorite business book is probably, honestly, it'd have to be, I hate to say it, Robert, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
That's a good one.
It feels like such a cliche, but it was such a mindset shift for me, because I grew up, and like I've said in this conversation, I spent all of those years working a W-2, and it never became so clear to me until I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. We're taught to work for money instead of having money work for us. And this is all I teach my kids right now. I beat it into their brains because, again, it comes back to time freedom. And I gave up so much time wearing the corporate chains. It was a gift to me. Don't get me wrong. I'm appreciative of it. I'm glad that I had as much success. It laid the foundation that we're talking about today. But there's so many better ways to do it. And I want my children to have the time freedom that comes from sort of that rich dad mindset. So sorry for the cliche, but there's just so much truth in it.
Oh, it's a good one, and it's impacted a ton of people. All right, so favorite entrepreneur to study?
Ooh, you will not believe this, but it would be Rockefeller.
Okay.
I am a big fan of biographies. I have learned so much by trying to read as many biographies, because there's so much wisdom in learning from their experiences, even in industries that, are 150 years old. I love Warren Buffett. I love Charlie Munger. These biographies are super powerful, but Rockefeller just had a way about him that was different. And a lot of people misunderstand Rockefeller, but he was a very purpose-driven investor as well.
Awesome. Love it. I'm gonna have to look at that for sure. All right. Biggest lesson business has taught you?
Oh man, it's got to be the sort of the abundance, the availability of abundance. And maybe some of this is the market, in which we work. Greenville County is not only is it beautiful and it's popular, but there's so much to go around. And I talk a lot about time freedom. And this is part of the reason why I've chosen not to have employees. Growing up in corporate culture, I had lots of employees. And so there's plenty of reasons not to have employees. But the biggest one for me now is that I can't preach time freedom and put all of these people under my employment. What I do is I try to give back to as many of my contractors as I can. I employ the same cleaner for my midterm, short-term rentals. Wherever I can go deep, I find the person that's really going to deliver for me, and I go deep with them. I give back as much as I can for them, rather than spreading it super thin. And that's an opportunity for me to really make a difference in their lives, where, they too can have some time freedom that's often come by way of financial freedom. And it comes back to relationships. You probably hear it on all your podcasts. The core of a successful real estate, a purpose-driven real estate business, is relationships.
Love it. Love it. All right. Last question for you. Here is, what's one habit that's contributed most to your success?
It would have to be inspecting what I expect. I think when I contrast what we do to what I've seen a lot of landlords and real estate investors do, a lot of those folks don't have a willingness to get their hands dirty, and so it comes down to, how consistently do you inspect your properties? We do a lot of turnover, obviously, on the short-term and midterm side. How often are you in there inspecting the plumbing, inspecting the air filters, inspecting the water heater? We sort of have this set it and forget it mindset. We don't like to be as hands-on. Maybe even sometimes people think that, well, those tasks are below me. I'm just an investor. No, if you want to create a great experience for your tenants or your buyers, then you need to be hands-on. And so I am in the trenches, and I think this maybe is rooted in how I grew up. I've never been ashamed to do any job. I don't care if I'm the founder and CEO or if I'm cleaning toilets. It doesn't matter, because for me, it all sort of the cumulative outcome of all of that work is these great experiences. And that's what I'm really married to. And I believe when I do that well and I do that consistently, I'm inspecting what I expect, whether I do the work or it's someone that's, working for me. When I do that, it's the most God-honoring thing I can do. And it really is what stands Cornerstone Upstate up and different from a lot of what I see around me.
Love it. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Chris. This has been really great. You shared a lot of great information about entrepreneurship, AI, purpose, faith. So really, really valuable. I appreciate you being here. If someone wants to reach out to you, how can they reach you?
Well, Robert, we didn't talk any about social media because I don't recommend people reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, and if you do, but know that I really use Facebook only for business purposes. There's some Facebook groups that I think are incredibly useful, but that's about the extent of it. Anything else I find, for me, this isn't a knock on anybody else. For me, it's a huge distraction, and I just don't have time for it. I can't get into the scrolling. So to answer your question, you can email me at chris@cornerstoneupstate.com, or you can just call me. 864-214-6757. I don't mind. I would love making relationships with people. And if we can do business together, I am open to every possibility. I am very focused on Greenville County. And so if you have something that will help make Greenville County a better community, I'm all in. Call me, email me, and let's see what we can do to work together.
Awesome. Well, hey, appreciate you joining, and thank you to everyone for listening, and tune in for the next Purpose Driven Investor